The desert wind was still hot when Samantha Carter vanished from the parking lot of the Stater Bros Market in San Bernardino, California, a city with a population of just over 100,000, but where the nights could fall silent in a way that felt eerie. September 14th, 1990 began like any other day, until the temperature dropped suddenly and a layer of dry dust veiled the rows of cars in the lot, like a thin desert haze. At 9:08 p.m., the last coworker to see Samantha watched her walk out into the parking lot, holding her phone and hunching her shoulders inside a thin jacket, just a few steps from the flickering lights. Linda Rivas, the mother waiting for her daughter to come home, heard Samantha's voice cut off mid-sentence with the words, "Someone's watching me," before the call plunged into absolute silence. In the minutes that followed, minutes in which no camera, no witness, and no sound captured anything, something happened to Samantha, and that mystery would haunt San Bernardino for 3 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The night of September 14th, 1990 in San Bernardino was the kind of night that lifelong desert residents knew all too well. So dry that the wind carried fine sand across your face, so hot that warmth still rose from the concrete pavement, even though the clock had passed 9 p.m. The red signs of the Stater Bros Market glowed wearily, the overhead fluorescent lights flickering, flashing on and off like a bulb clinging to its last bit of power. The huge parking lot in front of the supermarket was almost empty, with only a few cars scattered here and there, each surrounded by long, sharp shadows. Every so often, a stronger gust would rattle the advertising posters hanging on the glass doors, producing that distinctive dry, rasping sound of desert nights. Samantha Carter, 22 years old, stepped out the back door of the supermarket after a long shift. She said goodbye to her last remaining coworker, an older woman who often worked the evening shift with her. The two exchanged a few quick jokes, but the coworker later said that when Samantha turned to leave, it felt like she was trying to hide something, or at least that she was in a hurry to get out of there. The final customer pushing a shopping cart toward the lot also caught a glimpse of Samantha passing by, holding a small bag and her keys. The store security guard, who had grown familiar with Samantha's face over many months of work, waved and said, "Good night, Sam." She smiled back, but the smile seemed a little forced, not exactly tired. More like her mind was focused on something behind her. As Samantha reached the edge of the parking lot, the steady drone of the I-215 freeway in the distance hummed like the endless roar of a machine running through the night. But mixed in were other sounds. The clatter of a metal can rolling across the cement, the bang of a metal door from a nearby store slamming in the wind. Samantha paused for a second and turned her head toward the patch of darkness beyond the reach of the lights. No one knows exactly what she saw, but hours later, when replaying the memory, her mother recalled that during the final phone call, Samantha had breathed softly and said in a quiet voice, just loud enough to hear, but enough to send a chill down her spine, "Mom, I think someone's watching me." The words made her mother ask urgently, "Where are you? Are you in the car yet?" But Samantha didn't answer right away. The wind picked up again, carrying the static hiss of the microphone as Samantha raised the phone. Then suddenly, a strange noise rang out, not clearly a dropped object or something bumping the phone, that sent a sharp, piercing sound through the line. "Sam? Are you still there?" The mother called quickly, but all she heard was wind whistling through the receiver. After that, the call cut off abruptly. Not a dropped signal, not a dead battery, but the kind of disconnection that produced a cold, crisp click, like someone had deliberately hung up. When Samantha's mother called back, she got only a busy signal before it went straight to voicemail. The hours that followed were a long, heavy stretch of time the family would never forget. 10 p.m. No texts, no calls. 11 p.m. Her father driving around the supermarket area. Midnight, knocking on the doors of Samantha's close friends. 1 a.m. Her brother driving along dark roads, calling out his sister's name in vain. By 2 a.m., even the hope that Samantha had simply fallen asleep at someone's house was gone. The sky to the east began to turn the pale gray of dawn, that cold light that makes every fear feel more real. Samantha's mother, her hands shaking uncontrollably, dialed 911. When the operator answered, she tried to stay calm, but her voice broke with every word. "My daughter, she hasn't come home. I think she's gone missing." And in that very moment, at the break of dawn on September 15th, 1990, the disappearance of Samantha Carter officially began. As the first light of morning spread over the Stater Bros Market parking lot, a San Bernardino County Sheriff's Patrol car rolled into the area at 4:32 a.m. The air still carried the chill of the desert night, a half-warm, half-cold layer that made the two officers' breath fog slightly as they stepped out of the vehicle. The parking lot was almost completely silent, broken only by the sound of dry leaves spinning across the pavement and the distant rumble of early trucks on the I-215. The first thing they did was re-establish the point of origin for the entire case, the last place Samantha Carter was seen. The eastern section of the parking lot, where the fluorescent lights were sparsest. They tried to match every small detail from the families' and witnesses' descriptions, even though the scene now consisted only of patches of darkness and pale yellow light stretching across the asphalt. 3 key witnesses arrived very early at the police's request: the security guard, the co-worker who shared the shift, and the last customer to leave the supermarket the previous night. The security guard, the one who had said the final goodbye to Samantha, said she left through the back door in a hurried manner, as if she wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. He clearly remembered one thing that had bothered him. Just before Samantha walked into the dimly lit area, he caught a glimpse of a man standing at the very edge of the lot, several dozen meters away from her, almost completely still. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, but looking back, an uneasy feeling crept into his voice as he recounted it. He stood there a very long time, way too long for a regular customer. Samantha's co-worker mentioned that Samantha had seemed distracted while clocking out. She remembered Samantha turning to look out at the parking lot twice before pushing the door open to leave, something Samantha rarely did. The last customer said that as he pushed his shopping cart toward the lot, he heard a strange metallic sound from farther away, not loud, but different enough that he turned to look, and at the same moment saw Samantha walking faster toward the parking area. These statements weren't identical, but they shared one common thread. All of them mentioned something unusual at the edge of the lot. The two officers went inside the supermarket to review the VHS security tapes, the grainy, noisy kind of recordings common in 1990. They played the footage in slow motion, flashing lights, cast shadows, blurred movement, but one frame made both of them pause longer. At the edge of the parking lot, exactly where the guard had pointed, there was a figure standing for nearly 3 minutes. No clear face, no clear build, only the upper body slightly leaning toward the area where Samantha would appear moments later. The image was so blurry, it was hard to determine gender, but the posture and height showed it was neither Samantha nor any of the 3 witnesses. When Samantha stepped out the back door, the figure was still there, then vanished from the frame just a few seconds before Samantha reached the same spot. There was no screaming, no struggle visible, no obvious signs of anything, just a series of interrupted images that made Samantha's disappearance even more baffling. After leaving the supermarket, the police continued gathering footage from traffic cameras in the surrounding area, at the auto repair shop next door, the Chevron gas station near the intersection, the streetlight pole with a camera on the main road. They hoped to find at least one clip showing the direction Samantha left the lot. But the more they checked, the more they realized something very strange. Every one of these cameras had malfunctioned during the exact same time window, from 9:06 to 9:13 p.m., 7 minutes, that overlapped precisely with when Samantha walked out of the supermarket and her call with her mother was cut off. At the gas station, the camera showed only a frozen white screen. At the repair shop, the VHS tape jumped and skipped continuously. The main road camera was completely black. No officer believed those 7 minutes were a coincidence. But they also had no explanation yet. The fact that Samantha hadn't called a taxi, hadn't asked anyone for a ride, and hadn't stopped at any store or gas station within more than a mile, made one thing the only certainty they had at that point. She had either left the area in her own car or been forced to leave. As the sun peeked over the mountains, its light stretching pale orange streaks across the pavement. The investigation team knew that the first hours of the case had passed in uncertainty. Samantha's disappearance didn't resemble a voluntary runaway or someone simply staying out overnight. It left a void with no direction, no clues, and now almost no footage capturing the most critical moment. And that was when the investigators understood they were dealing with a missing person case, where unusual elements had begun appearing from the very first minute. As the witnesses left and the area was cordoned off with standard yellow tape, the main crime scene unit from the sheriff's department began taking over the Stater Bros Market parking lot around just after 6 a.m., when the sun was already high but the morning chill still lingered in the air. Daylight revealed scratches on the pavement, the dark patches where lights hadn't reached the night before, and details that had been completely invisible in the darkness. One officer crouched close to the asphalt and pointed out to his colleague a fairly deep shoe print, with the jagged tread pattern clearly outlined. The size was much larger than a woman's shoe, likely a men's adult size, around size 11 or 12. What caught their attention was the direction of the print. It was located more than 10 meters from where Samantha had walked in the camera footage, but in the very dark area near the edge of the lot, where both the security guard and the camera had recorded a figure standing motionless for several minutes. Most of the other shoe prints in the area had been blurred by the wind overnight, but a few deeper ones were still clear enough to show they didn't belong to Samantha. She usually wore soft-soled sneakers that couldn't leave such heavy tread marks on the hard surface. Another officer walked along the small drainage ditch that ran beside the parking lot. At the edge of the ditch, where the morning light slanted across, he spotted a very small piece of tape, barely longer than a fingernail. It was stuck to the dry, sandy soil, with slightly torn edges and a thin layer of dust on it. No one knew how long it had been there. It could be litter, it could be harmless, but its location prompted the crime scene team to collect it. It was near the exact stretch where Samantha had vanished from the camera view. The piece of tape was carefully placed in an evidence bag, labeled with a code, and handed to a technician for logging. Farther toward the center of the lot, another officer signaled the crime scene supervisor to come over. "Do you see that?" he asked, then pointed to tire tracks on the pavement. The tracks weren't very pronounced, but upon close inspection, it was clear the front of the vehicle had pulled out of the parking space at an odd angle. Instead of heading straight toward the lot exit like most drivers do, these tracks showed the car turning in a path that veered much farther to the right than normal, as if the driver had jerked the wheel sharply when leaving, or been forced to jerk it sharply. When they measured the angle and deviation, since the pavement still held faint traces of the tire movement, the investigation team noted that the direction didn't match normal driving behavior. If Samantha had been driving, she would habitually turn left toward Kendall Drive. But these tracks pointed toward Devore Road, an area mostly consisting of dirt roads and empty lots. This didn't prove anything conclusively, but it clearly opened the possibility that Samantha's car had left the lot in a direction she had no reason to take after 9 p.m. Another officer scanned the ground around that spot for signs of sudden braking or skidding, but found nothing obvious. Still, there was one small detail that made the whole team pause. The right side tire track showed unusual variations in depth, deeper in a few short sections, then back to normal, as though the tire had experienced sideways pressure while the vehicle began moving. The crime scene unit reconstructed a diagram of the parking lot from the camera footage, marking every spot Samantha had walked through, and every place witnesses had seen lights or a figure. When compared visually, the entire area laid out before them became a series of disconnected pieces. A shoe print that wasn't Samantha's at the edge of the lot, the small piece of tape near the ditch, and tire tracks leaving the lot in a strange direction. The presence of these details didn't yet provide any definitive answer, but taken together, they created the sense that the parking lot had witnessed something other than a woman simply walking to her car and driving home as usual. A veteran officer called it a quiet but uneasy scene. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no scattered belongings, yet scattered small details enough to make any experienced investigator uncomfortable. When the team finished marking the entire area, they stood silently for a few seconds, looking toward the open space where the traffic cameras had mysteriously stopped working the night before. From there, their gaze shifted to the tire tracks they had just outlined on the pavement, though it was still far too early to draw any conclusions. Many of them shared the same unspoken thought. Samantha's car might not have left the parking lot of her own free will. And if that was true, then Samantha's disappearance wasn't a case of an adult voluntarily leaving home. It was the beginning of something far more serious. As the parking lot had been fully marked and suspicious items collected, the investigation team moved to the next step, trying to reconstruct the movement of the car Samantha might have driven or been driven in before disappearing completely from the supermarket's camera view. A key part of the investigative direction lay in the camera systems of stores and businesses within a 1-mile radius of the Stater Bros Market. This was a commercial area mixed with residential zones, featuring a few auto repair shops, a gas station, a late-night convenience store, a car wash, and a shop selling used electronics. 6 locations among them had security cameras in 1990, mostly low-quality VHS systems that produced jerky footage and only retained recordings for 24 to 48 hours, unless the tape was overwritten. Each tape was brought back to the sheriff's image analysis room for immediate review that same morning. The police sequentially played footage from each business, focusing on the time window around 9 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., the estimated period when Samantha left the parking lot. The first camera, from the Chevron gas station, showed almost no activity during that window except a few trucks passing on the freeway in the background. The second camera, from Doug's auto repair shop, was heavily distorted from the previous night due to strong winds, causing the image to jump continuously and provide nothing clear. The third camera, belonging to a small grocery store, ran fairly steadily but had such a narrow angle that it only captured the front entrance and recorded no vehicles except a local customer's minivan. The remaining 2 cameras had recorded nothing at all during the relevant time. One had stopped due to a jammed tape, the other had lost power for several minutes. Investigator Alvarez, who led the route tracing effort, reviewed each segment in slow motion, using both the naked eye and the crude brightening equipment available in 1990 to try to pull details from the heavy noise. Everything was fruitless until they loaded the tape from the used electronics store, the only one with a camera pointed toward the main road running parallel to the back of the supermarket. The frame was blurry and poorly lit, but between 9:14 and 9:15 p.m., it captured headlights moving from left to right. Although the license plate, model, or color could not be identified, the height and intensity of the headlights were relatively similar to those of the 1988 Toyota Corolla that Samantha drove. Even more notable, the rear brake lights flashed 3 times in rapid succession within less than a second before the car continued moving. Brake lights flashing like that were not a common technical fault. Most vehicles kept the lights steadily on while the pedal was depressed. But 3 rapid flashes often appeared in reports of abductions or emergency situations when a victim tried to signal the car behind or attract attention, a kind of instinctive signal frequently used by victims without conscious thought. Of course, the police could not conclude it was Samantha's car based solely on the dim lights, but this was the first clue suggesting that the vehicle Samantha might have been in at that moment was traveling in a direction completely opposite to her route home. Instead of turning left toward Kendall Drive to head into the residential area where her family lived, the car in the footage turned right, heading deeper into the empty land toward Devore, an area with almost no houses, poor roads, and little nighttime traffic. This made the team linger longer over the frame, attempting to estimate the vehicle's speed by measuring the blur of the lights as they passed each roadside pole. They calculated the car was traveling about 25 to 30 miles per hour slower than normal, as if the driver was unfamiliar with the road or operating the vehicle under stress. After cross-checking the time synchronization between the supermarket camera tape and the electronics store tape, the investigation team confirmed the intervals nearly matched. Only 4 to 5 minutes between when Samantha left the supermarket camera frame and when the car with Corolla-like lights appeared in the second camera. That distance was entirely consistent with leaving the parking lot, crossing 2 small intersections, and reaching the main road where the camera recorded it. Yet the direction of travel was completely contrary to normal logic, because Samantha had no reason to head toward Devore at such a late hour. When compared with what had been collected at the parking lot, the stranger's shoe print, the small piece of tape, the tire tracks leaving in an unusual direction, The image of the car with flashing brake lights seemed to further reinforce the suspicion that the vehicle's movement that night was not the result of a voluntary decision. Investigator Alvarez wrote a short but weighty note in his notebook that made everyone present understand the gravity of the situation. If this really is Samantha's car, then the car did not go in the direction she wanted. And that was the moment the investigation shifted from treating it as a missing person case to considering the possibility of criminal activity, even though they still lacked clear evidence to confirm it. However, the scattered pieces of information gathered so far were beginning to form a picture that no one on the investigation team wanted to face. While the investigation team was still reviewing the camera footage showing lights similar to Samantha's car turning toward Devore, the dispatch unit received an additional call from a man coming forward to report information he believed might be related to the girl who went missing last night. This man was a long-haul truck driver who regularly ran the I-215 route, and on the exact night Samantha disappeared, he was traveling southbound, less than 2 miles from the Stater Bros Market parking lot. The man was immediately invited to the sheriff's office to give an official statement. In the interview room, he described the incident with the steady voice of someone who had spent years observing the roads as a professional driver. He said that while driving at about 40 to 45 miles per hour, he saw 2 vehicles ahead moving unusually. The first was a small sedan, light-colored, size consistent with a late 1980s Toyota Corolla. The one behind it, following much closer than normal, was a black pickup truck. According to him, the sedan appeared to be forced to stop suddenly as it turned onto the freeway on-ramp because he saw the brake lights come on abruptly, then flash repeatedly as if the driver was trying to signal something. At the same time, the pickup closed in even tighter and seemed to force the sedan to change direction. The truck driver told the police that the distance between the 2 vehicles was far less than safe, and that the pickup's behavior looked like it was trying to control the direction of the car in front. When asked if he saw a license plate or any clear distinguishing features, the man shook his head. The lane separation and the truck's speed meant he could only make out the general shapes. However, there was one detail he remembered very clearly. The pickup's paint reflected streetlights in a distinctive pale, silvery way, typical of a popular model from that era. A Ford F-150 from 1989 or 1990, with black paint that had a slight bluish sheen when viewed from a distance. It was the kind of truck he saw on the road constantly for years, and he believed his identification was accurate enough for the police to take seriously. As the interview continued, investigator Alvarez asked more about the person in the pickup. The man stated he had clearly seen the outline of someone in the driver's seat as the pickup closed in on the sedan. "I couldn't see a face," he said, "but I know for sure it was a man. Broad shoulders, arm hanging slightly out the window like he was steering." This detail matched perfectly with the earlier supermarket camera footage. The figure standing at the edge of the lot had height and shoulder width consistent with a male. Hearing this, the investigator quickly jotted a note. If the truck driver's account was accurate, then Samantha had not turned toward Devore on her own. The pickup had forced her car to change direction. After the interview, the team immediately returned to the existing evidence. They reviewed the parking lot tire track diagram, the strange turn Samantha's vehicle had taken, and the camera segment showing the brake lights flashing 3 times. 3 separate pieces of information, but now put together, they formed a disturbingly cohesive picture. Samantha's car had not left the parking lot voluntarily, had not taken the opposite route home on its own, and had not headed toward Devore by choice. Whoever was controlling the direction, whoever it was sitting in the black pickup the truck driver had seen. Investigator Alvarez ordered the data analysis unit to begin screening the list of all black pickup trucks registered in the San Bernardino area in 1990. Instead of limiting it to just Ford Phone 150 seconds, they filtered all late 1980s pickups, then narrowed it down to those with paint matching the witness's description. The initial list came to more than 80 vehicles, a number impossible to investigate quickly. But after filtering by a 1-mile radius around the supermarket, and by records of vehicles frequently traveling the I-215 during that period, the list shrank to 41. Within that group, 8 belonged to employees of Southern California Edison, SCE, the regional power utility whose fleet commonly included black or dark blue phone 150 seconds. Notably, SCE trucks often had paint that reflected streetlights in a way very similar to the truck driver's description. This was not incriminating evidence, but it was a new investigative lead. And more importantly, the coincidence with the supermarket footage, the figure standing at the lot's edge watching Samantha, forced the team to closely examine whether that man might have been one of the utility workers who had been in the area the evening. Samantha disappeared. Everything was still only hypothesis, but it was compelling enough to push the investigation deeper into those 8 individuals. As the truck driver signed the statement and left the sheriff's office, the sun was fully up and daylight filled the conference room, highlighting the camera stills spread across the table. Investigator Alvarez stood looking at them for a long moment, then paused at the sheet, noting the time the Corolla-like vehicle appeared in the electronics store camera. 9:14 p.m. If the driver's account was correct, then just 30 seconds earlier, Samantha had been forced to change direction by the pickup, and in that brief span of time, the entire route she was made to take had changed completely. This was no longer a random disappearance. 3 witnesses, 1 blurry camera, and a long-haul driver had provided the first pieces showing that Samantha had fallen into someone's hands, and that someone had prepared for it far more than just happening to encounter her that night. After the truck driver's statement revealed the presence of a black pickup that likely forced Samantha's car to change direction just before the sedan turned toward Devore, the investigation team knew they had to act quickly before any information related to the suspect vehicle could be lost over time. They held an urgent meeting at the sheriff's office that same morning. The conference table was covered with printouts from cameras, photos of the shoe prints in the parking lot, witness statement notes, and a large sheet marking all areas the suspect vehicle might have passed through. At the center of the board was the description: black pickup, late 1980s model, possibly an F-150. Investigator Alvarez assigned a team to review vehicle registration records in San Bernardino for 1990. They needed to find all black pickup trucks, models from 1988 to 1991. But first, focus on Ford phone, 150 seconds, since that was the model most common with the paint and body style that best matched the streetlight reflection the driver had described. The California Department of Motor Vehicles had switched to a new storage system a few years later, but 1990 records were still kept in physical files and crude, digitized files. The search was therefore far from quick. Old record boxes were brought out by archivists and placed on tables. Each file opened, each line of information cross-checked. After nearly 3 hours of continuous work, the team compiled a list of exactly 41 black or dark blue Ford phone 150 seconds registered in the San Bernardino area and parts of surrounding regions in the year Samantha disappeared. The number was still large, but at least they had significantly narrowed the scope from hundreds of pickups registered in the same period. However, as they dug deeper into individual records, some irregularities began to emerge. The first vehicle that drew attention was registered under the name of a man listed in the records as James Fuller, residing in Highland. Everything seemed normal, until one team member cross-checked Fuller's social security number against the county death database. The results silenced the entire room. The man named James Fuller had actually died in 1984, 6 years before the Ford F-150 was registered in his name. There was no other person with the same name at that address, nor any family member who had registered it on his behalf. This meant the vehicle had been registered with fake paperwork or a stolen identity, a sign never considered coincidental in a serious missing person case. When verified again with the DMV, the records confirmed the signature on the vehicle registration did not match the real Fuller's signature kept in old military files. Whoever registered the F-150 had used the identity of a deceased person, and that was enough to place it in the group of vehicles most worth tracking. An investigator immediately noted on the board, vehicle number 12, invalid owner identity. But that was only the first irregular vehicle on the list. As they continued screening the remaining records, the team realized 8 of the 41 belonged to employees of Southern California Edison, SCE, the largest power utility in the region. This was not surprising. Utility workers at the time were often issued or assisted in purchasing Ford F-150 trucks, which were ideal for carrying tools and traveling over rough terrain routes. However, because of this very coincidence, the team began re-examining the detail from the supermarket camera. The tall figure, with broad shoulders, standing motionless at the edge of the parking lot on the night Samantha disappeared. The posture, standing still in the darkness, not moving, observing the lot from a distance, reminded them of the stance of people in field service jobs, power line workers, repair crews, construction. They were accustomed to standing quietly in dark positions to assess situations before working at night. From the 8 phone 150 seconds owned by SCE, the list was narrowed once more by filtering according to work zones and night shift schedules of employees on September 14, 1990. Personnel records from that era were not fully digitized, but SCE's management still retained paper shift schedules that had been scanned. In those shift logs, only 3 workers were assigned to work or be on call near the San Bernardino area on the exact evening Samantha disappeared. Those names were circled, coded, and sent to the background check team for a second round of verification. Among those 3 names, one made investigator Alvarez pause longer. Richard Hale. Hale was a veteran power company worker who had been with SCE for more than 10 years before Samantha's disappearance. Records showed he lived only a few minutes' drive from the Stater Bros Market. He also owned a black Ford F-150, registered in 1989, matching the truck driver's description on the I-215. Hale's F-150 was among the 8 owned by SCE and also among the 3 employees with work schedules that night. The police did not jump to conclusions. They had to consider that the Ford F-150 was a common truck in the area, and the coincidence of color alone could not be treated as evidence. But the fact that Hale's vehicle, along with 2 others from SCE, appeared on the exact list of potentially involved vehicles meant he could not be ruled out in the initial investigation. Additionally, Hale's home address lay between 2 routes that could connect the supermarket parking lot to the stretch of road where the truck driver saw the car being blocked. This did not prove he was at the scene, but it increased the possibility that he could have moved through the area without drawing attention. As the list of 41 vehicles was marked with priority symbols, a pattern gradually emerged. Only 12 now required direct follow-up, with the 3 SCE-owned ones the most worth watching. One investigator noted that Hale's Ford F-150 had been taken to a local garage for repairs in 1991, just 1 year after the disappearance, prompting the team to want to trace the vehicle's maintenance history to see if there were signs of carpet replacement, door replacement, or repainting, things not always documented on paper at the time. When Alvarez looked up at the summary board, he realized every investigative thread was naturally converging on a very small group. The SCE-owned phone, 150 seconds, and one name beginning to stand out among them, though there was still no evidence to confirm anything. The fact that Richard Hale's truck appeared on such a short list could not be dismissed as mere coincidence. And as any experienced investigator understood, the smallest details in this early stage were often the foundation for uncovering the truth after many months, or even many years of it remaining hidden. As the list of Ford phone 150 seconds had been narrowed down and the SCE employees on night shift duty identified, Richard Hale became the first name the investigation team needed to contact. Not because they already had specific evidence against him, but because his home location, work schedule, and the type of truck he owned placed him in the needs immediate attention group under the Rapid Response Missing Person Protocol. Moreover, the coincidence of his movement area on the night Samantha disappeared made this initial interview more necessary than ever. Around 2 p.m. that same day, 2 investigators knocked on Hale's door at a small 1970s-style house on the edge of San Bernardino, with an old wooden fence and a front yard scattered with a few power company worker tools. Hale opened the door quickly, showing no sign of unease at seeing 2 police officers standing there. He was in his mid-40s, stocky build, broad shoulders, with a gaze so calm it felt strangely out of place for someone being visited in the middle of a missing person investigation. When informed that the police wanted to ask a few questions about the evening of September 14th, Hale agreed immediately and invited them into the living room, a surprisingly tidy space, with repair tools neatly arranged in one corner and an old TV tuned to the news channel but muted. Investigator Alvarez began with a direct question. "Can you tell us where you were that night?" Without hesitation, Hale replied, "I was on night shift for SCE, at the substation on Glen Helen Parkway. I was on duty from around 8 p.m. until nearly midnight. Didn't leave the substation." His voice was calm, steady, almost as if he had prepared the answer in advance. This caught the investigator's attention, but it wasn't enough to draw any conclusions. Alvarez followed up. "Is there anyone who can confirm that? A coworker? Supervisor? The person who took over the next shift?" Hale shook his head. "That night I was on duty alone. Nobody comes around the substation at that hour. If you need to check, just ask SCE." This was the part that made things difficult for the team. In 1990, electronic time clock systems weren't common. Confirming an employee's presence at a power substation relied entirely on paper reports and shift logs documents the worker could fill out himself. SCE records did show Hale was scheduled for night duty, but nothing guaranteed he had actually been there the whole time. The investigator noted in his notebook, "Alibi, not independently verifiable." The interview continued with questions about Hale's daily routes, work habits, shift end times, and typical truck travel patterns. Hale answered every question calmly, without vagueness, but also without providing specific details that could prove he was at the substation at the exact moment Samantha vanished. When asked about his Ford F-150, Hale explained he used it mainly for work, occasionally driving it to pick up supplies or visit friends. When offered the chance to inspect the truck, Hale said it was currently at a local garage for brake work, but he showed no discomfort when the police expressed interest in checking the paperwork. All of Hale's responses flowed unusually smoothly, for an ordinary person suddenly being questioned in a disappearance case that had the whole town on edge. There was too little hesitation, too little unease. Some team members who had interviewed many innocent suspects before noted very different reactions: fear, anxiety, or an urge to prove their innocence. But Hale didn't fit that pattern. He wasn't defensive, nor overly concerned about the case, as if this were just a routine procedure he had been through before. This made the interview even harder to read. During the conversation, Alvarez casually mentioned the supermarket parking lot and asked if Hale had passed through that area on the night Samantha disappeared. Hale leaned forward slightly, looked the investigator straight in the eye, and said in an even tone, "I might have driven past that area before starting my shift. I often stop for coffee at the gas station nearby. Maybe that night too. I don't remember exactly." That answer caused both investigators to pause for a few seconds. Up to that point, no question had directly suggested Hale was near the supermarket at the time of Samantha's disappearance. Yet he himself brought up the possibility of having been in the vicinity. This detail was noted immediately, not because it proved involvement, but because it placed him geographically near the last sighting of Samantha's car on nearby cameras. The investigator pressed, "You say you don't remember clearly, but you remember every detail about being at the substation?" Hale shrugged. "Passing through there is routine. I often stop in that area for coffee. Being at the substation was my shift, so I remember that." The calm in this response shifted the tone of the interview. The coincidence Hale mentioned didn't help remove him from suspicion. On the contrary, it placed him near the scene at the critical time in the case. Though the police could draw no conclusions from this first conversation, they left Hale's house with a distinct feeling that the man they had just spoken to was unlike the innocent people they had encountered before. The way he spoke, the lack of overreaction, and especially his voluntary admission of possible presence near the supermarket area, forced them to mark his name higher on the list for further checks. As the two investigators stepped out of the house, afternoon sunlight fell across the yard, reflecting off the power company tools scattered on the old truck in Hale's driveway. There was nothing to charge him with in this interview, but also nothing to rule him out. And in mysterious disappearance cases, those who cannot be excluded are always the ones the investigation team is forced to return to again and again. 4 days after Samantha Carter disappeared, when the atmosphere in her family had shifted from worry to real fear, an unexpected call from a local resident suddenly steered the investigation in a completely new direction. Around 6:45 a.m. on September 18th, a man living near Devore Road, called the sheriff's dispatch to report that he had seen a small, light-colored car, looking like it had been abandoned in an empty lot north of the road. Devore Road was a half-urban, half-wild stretch. To the south were scattered small clusters of homes. To the north lay open, dusty land connecting to routes leading toward the edge of the desert. This was not a place a young person living in a populated area like Samantha would have any reason to drive to after dark. When the patrol unit arrived, early sunlight hit the pavement, creating a patchy glow among the sandy patches. They spotted Samantha's 1988 silver Toyota Corolla parked about 10 meters from the road's edge, neatly and strangely clean compared to the dusty ground around it. The driver's side door was ajar by 3 to 4 inches, just enough to notice it wasn't fully closed, but with no signs of forced entry. Investigator Alvarez was the first to approach. He didn't touch the car immediately but stood observing from about 2 meters away, scanning the corners of the lot. No prominent tire tracks other than the Corolla's own. No dropped items, no bags, no clothing, no footprints deep enough to hold their shape through a windy desert night. The empty scene made the car look as though it had been placed there deliberately, not matching the idea that Samantha had simply driven here and walked away. When opening the door with gloved hands, Alvarez noticed no strange odors inside, no gasoline, no chemicals, nothing suggesting violence. The cabin was tidy, the seats undisturbed, the radio still tuned to the station Samantha usually listened to. The keys were lying on the passenger seat, not in the ignition, a detail that made him pause for a few seconds. This wasn't normal behavior for someone leaving a car in a hurry. People usually turn off the engine and take the keys, or if panicking and running out, the keys are often left in the ignition. The neat placement of the keys on the passenger seat felt more intentional. Alvarez leaned in to closely examine the driver's and passenger's seat cushions for scratches, scuffs, or any signs of struggle. But there was almost nothing. Minor slide marks on the driver's seat could have come from Samantha's normal workday. The passenger seat showed nothing unusual. Only when he shifted his gaze to the back seat did the investigator sense something off. The rear seat surface was slightly damp, yet there were no signs of pooled water anywhere else in the car. Placing a gloved hand on it, he felt a faint coolness, as if the upholstery had only recently dried. The strange part was that the past 3 nights had brought no rain. The entire Devore and San Bernardino area was in a prolonged dry heat spell, with winds strong enough to blow away any moisture if any had entered the car. There was no reasonable explanation for the isolated dampness on the back seat. A technician checked the window frames, rubber seals, and headliner, but found no water streaks running down. If water had gotten in, it would have left trails on the doors or floor mats. Yet the mats were completely dry. It felt as though something wet had once been placed on the back seat and then removed before the car was abandoned. No blood, no stains, no odor, just an inexplicable cool, damp layer. Investigator Alvarez stepped back and asked the technician to photograph the scene from every angle, including close-ups of the rear seat area. Then he observed the car's parking orientation. The Toyota was parked perfectly straight, wheels aligned, almost no deviation. If Samantha had driven here herself, perhaps she had parked carefully intending to return. But given the circumstances of her disappearance, that was hard to accept. If Samantha had been forced out of the supermarket parking lot, there was no reason for whoever forced her to park so neatly. Additionally, the car faced toward the dirt road leading into the sparsely populated area, making the investigator realize this wasn't a temporary stop. It felt like the end point of a calculated action. Bring the car here, park it in an easily visible spot, leave the door slightly open to suggest the person who left wouldn't return, then depart the scene by another means. Another notable point was the lack of fresh tire marks around the car, meaning the black pickup, if it had blocked or forced the vehicle, had not stopped in this same area, or had stopped elsewhere out of the wind that would preserve tracks. Alvarez signaled the technicians to collect dust samples, photograph the entire ground surface, and focus on 2 points: the door handles and the back seat. He didn't expect clear fingerprints. The car had been exposed outdoors for 4 days in dry heat, which rarely preserves prints, but he wanted everything collected thoroughly before time erased whatever small clues remained. An officer standing a few steps away remarked that finding the car completely intact, no forced ignition, no broken windows, no ransacked interior, was one of the clearest signs it hadn't been stolen. It wasn't taken for use, nor stripped for parts. It had been placed there, like an object meant to appear at the right time and place. Right after sealing the vehicle, Alvarez added to his notebook, "Car undamaged, not ransacked. Rear seat cool and damp can only mean something or someone was on it earlier." The team's overall feeling was that the car's silence, too clean, too neat, too perfect, wasn't normal. It resembled a void someone had tried to create by erasing every obvious sign of presence. But while everything else in the car said nothing, the strange dampness on the back seat said too much. Samantha hadn't simply vanished. Her car had been driven, stopped, positioned here, and something had happened in the back seat, something the desert wind and time hadn't yet fully erased. Samantha's Toyota Corolla was towed to the San Bernardino County Forensic Examination Center that same morning it was found, to prevent the desert sun and dry winds from covering the fragile remaining traces with another layer of dust. The center's garage was a large space with white lights shining down from the ceiling onto every surface, making every speck of dust and every tiniest scratch on the car clearly visible to the technicians accustomed to reading stories from those silent marks. When the car was placed on the rotating inspection platform, investigator Alvarez stood right behind, watching every step the technical team took. Everyone wore double gloves and protective suits, speaking very little to avoid creating noise interference or letting hair or fabric fibers fall onto the scene. The examination began with the driver's seat area, the spot Samantha had certainly used on the day she disappeared. A technician used an alternate light source to scan every centimeter of the seatbelt. Under the fluorescent glow, a short hair appeared, stuck close to the edge of the belt at the exact point where it would touch the driver's shoulder. Dark brown, thick, and straight. Alvarez immediately requested macro photos and collection of the sample. The strange thing was that Samantha had light blonde hair, longer and finer, so this hair did not match her physical characteristics. It was located on the driver's side, where Samantha should have sat and fastened the belt. If a hair that wasn't Samantha's was there, it was a sign that someone else had driven the car after the moment she vanished. Nothing inside the car was broken or heavily disturbed, but the presence of this hair, even though tiny, suggested that the person behind the wheel of the Corolla in its final minutes was not necessarily Samantha. When moving to the passenger seat, another technician discovered a few small scratches on the seat surface, short, thin curved lines, as though made by something sharp or hard-edged. No tears, just shallow marks on the fabric, compared to the scratches on the driver's seat noted earlier in the supermarket parking lot. These had similar shapes. They could have come from something being placed down or rubbing against the seat as someone entered the car. Not enough to identify the object exactly, but definitely not from Samantha's normal activity. When shifting to the back seat, the area previously noted for the strange, cool dampness, the technicians worked even more carefully. Under the angled scanning light, the rear seat surface revealed tiny sparkling particles. One technician gently touched the tip of tweezers to them and lifted a small, dark blue fabric fiber, less than half a centimeter long. It was too small to identify immediately by eye, but it was in a distinct location, right in the center of the back seat, where the dampness had been detected earlier. The technician placed the fiber in an evidence bag, noting the exact position by surface coordinates, then continued searching. When shining the light toward the left corner of the seat, they found two more small pieces, one light blue, one darker blue. All three fibers were unlike the upholstery material in the car. The 1988 Corolla used gray cloth, not blue fabric. These pieces came from something else, or from clothing worn by someone who had sat in the back seat. Most importantly, Samantha rarely sat in the back of her own car, and according to her family, she didn't often give rides to anyone at night. These fibers, together with the dampness, painted a picture of a person or an object having been there after Samantha left the supermarket. When examining the floor mat under the back seat, the technician discovered a very faint shoe print, but the size and tread pattern matched the shoe print from the supermarket parking lot. It was not Samantha's shoe. It also wasn't in a position she could have left while entering or exiting the car. The print was on the riser behind the driver's seat, where a backseat passenger would place their foot. This aligned with all the prior data. In the supermarket parking lot, there was a large shoe print at the edge where the figure had appeared. On the car at Devore Road, there was a print of the same pattern. This didn't prove conclusively it was the same person, but the probability of coincidence was too low to ignore. When moving to the dashboard and rear door handles, the technician used fingerprint powder to search for any remaining prints, but the result was surprising. The dashboard, rear door handles, and inner rear window glass all were clean, with no clear fingerprints from Samantha. Under ultraviolet light, no sweat, skin oil, or even faint ridge patterns appeared that could match her known prints. This made the whole team pause. If Samantha never sat in the back, that would still make sense. But in her own personal car, the complete absence of the owner's fingerprints on any rear surfaces, especially the inner rear door handles, raised a question. Why did the back seat show signs of someone having been there, yet have no fingerprints from Samantha at all? If she had been pushed into the back seat, there would be prints. If she had never sat there on the night of the incident, then the person in the back could not have been her. And if it wasn't her, then who and for what reason had sat in the back seat of a car that was becoming the center of a disappearance case? One technician suggested checking the door edges further, especially the outer rear door areas less exposed to direct desert wind. When dusting powder there, they found a faint fingerprint not clear enough for immediate identification, but still collected for later comparison. That print did not match Samantha's fingerprints, based on the samples her family had already provided. This discovery made the picture of what happened inside the car even clearer. Someone else, not Samantha, had touched the rear door from the inside or while exiting. Combined with the unknown hair, the blue fibers, and the shoe print, the back seat became the focal point of suspicion. Investigator Alvarez stood looking at the full examination diagram marked with photos, notes, and sample coordinates. He realized something undeniable. Almost every trace on the car indicated that someone other than Samantha had been inside the vehicle during the time between when she left the supermarket and when the car was found. Everything they were collecting, from the hair to the fibers, from the shoe print to the scratches, was reinforcing this. The deeper the examination went, the more the car resembled an unfinished letter, empty, silent, but containing scattered clues left by a hand that had tried to erase traces but couldn't erase them all. And as the investigator reviewed the final note from the session, no fingerprints from Samantha in the rear seating area, he felt clearly that not just the car, but the entire story was gradually revolving around that back seat. A back seat that Samantha had probably never touched on that fateful night. In the early days after Samantha's Corolla was brought to the forensic center, the urgency and the flood of incoming information put heavy pressure on the technical team's workflow. Although every step was carefully documented and followed standard procedure, sometimes the very complexity of the case and the sheer volume of samples led to small errors that could slow down the entire investigation. The dark blue fabric fiber, one of the most important samples found on the back seat, was a typical example of that. While sorting samples by material type for transfer to the fiber analysis lab, a newer technician mistakenly placed the blue fiber in the lint group, meaning the category for random dust and fluff commonly found in vehicle interiors. This misclassification pushed the sample to the bottom of the priority list instead of being analyzed immediately alongside the other suspicious fibers found nearby. The item was logged only as unidentified fiber-suspected fabric lint and placed in tray number 18, a tray reserved for items of unclear forensic value. Under ideal conditions, a senior technician would review every tray to ensure no important sample was overlooked. But in the chaotic early days of the disappearance, tray 18 was not rechecked right away, and the blue fiber sat forgotten there for nearly 2 weeks. It was only when another team member reviewed the records to prepare a summary report for Investigator Alvarez that they realized one fabric piece had been noted in a way that didn't match the original scene collection description. The classification error was recorded in an internal report. Dark blue fabric fiber, not lint, requires reevaluation. But by that point, 2 weeks had already passed when the sample should have been tested immediately, since it was the kind of fiber that could link to clothing or an item once present on the back seat, the area considered the key focal point of the case. The fiber wasn't the only thing that hit a snag. The unknown hair recovered from the seat belt also ran into a different obstacle. When sent to the DNA lab, technicians used the standard DNA extraction process available in 1990, but the results were too weak to produce a complete DNA profile. The DNA analysis technology at the time wasn't sensitive enough to handle samples with very low biological material or those already degraded before collection. Hair without a root, or that had lost the follicle containing nuclear cells, often lacked sufficient DNA for extraction. The lead technician reported back, "DNA sample too weak, cannot identify. Advanced method needed currently not feasible." Even so, they preserved the hair sample under controlled conditions in case future technology improved. However, at that moment, the inability to test the DNA left the reasoning about who drove the car after Samantha vanished at a dead end. These shortcomings put investigator Alvarez in a difficult position. He had the shoe print, the damp back seat, the fabric fibers, but no confirmed information to connect those signs to any specific individual, especially Richard Hale, who remained on the suspect list, but without incriminating evidence. While reviewing all the documents to prepare a report for the sheriff's office, Alvarez reopened the internal notes file from the forensic team, those scribbled remarks technicians often jot down during evidence collection or examination. On the margin of a page near the end, among barely legible technical lines, there was a note written in faint blue ballpoint ink. Hale? No date, no signature, no indication of who wrote it? Just a lone question mark after the name of the man the investigation team had interviewed only days earlier. The note had no legal value, but it made Alvarez pause. Throughout the entire file, no technician had ever been asked to link Richard Hale's name to any specific piece of evidence. This meant the person who wrote the note had independently connected Hale's name to some object or trace during the examination process. And since the note was in the section describing the backseat survey, Alvarez knew it directly related to the area considered the most suspicious on the vehicle. Though he couldn't treat the note as evidence, it reflected something the technician had felt while observing the scene, something that made them think of the very name the investigation team was also considering. Alvarez photographed the note and flagged it in his personal file for follow-up. He couldn't ask the technician who wrote it, the note lacked any code or identifier, and the examination team at the time had 8 people rotating through shifts. But even so, the appearance of that name, however faint, felt like an indirect sign that the information they had on Hale needed closer scrutiny. As Alvarez stepped out of the evidence storage room, he stopped for a long moment in front of the enlarged photo of the Toyota Corolla abandoned on Devore Road. Everything there was silent. The car parked straight, no signs of violence, and the scene itself so clean it felt unsettling. But within that silence were details time couldn't completely erase. The hair of unknown origin, the strange fabric pieces, the shoe print matching the one at the supermarket, and especially the complete absence of Samantha's fingerprints on the back seat. All of it was telling a story that was missing only one piece, the identity of whoever had sat in the back seat. The fiber misclassification and DNA technology limitations delayed the answer, but they couldn't hide the truth that Samantha's car hadn't simply been driven away and abandoned by someone. It had become a second crime scene, where the traces left by the person involved were too few, but enough to show that Samantha's disappearance could not have been voluntary. And in the far corner of an old page, the question, Hale? Still stood there, like a small but persistent reminder that what they knew about this man might not be the whole truth. In the early months of 1991, after every round of vehicle examination, witness interviews, camera reviews, and F-150 registration searches, the investigation into Samantha Carter's disappearance reached the state that any veteran investigator dreads. The leads suddenly dried up. The dark blue fabric fiber that had been misclassified was never analyzed in time. The DNA sample from the hair was too weak for the technology available then, and potential suspect Richard Hale had an alibi confirmed by SCE paperwork, even though no one could prove he had actually been at the substation. Meanwhile, the shoe prints, the dampness on the back seat, and the period when traffic cameras malfunctioned were not enough to build a clear investigative direction. By late spring 1991, the search for new clues had become heavy going for the investigation team. Witnesses who had clearly remembered strange details from the night of September 14th began to fade in their recollections as time passed. The supermarket security guard, who had firmly stated he saw a figure standing at the edge of the lot, started to hesitate. Maybe I was mistaken. It could have just been a customer getting something from their car. Samantha's coworker, who had described her uneasy expression on that final evening, grew confused when questioned again after 8 months. I'm not sure anymore. That night was long and busy. Maybe I remembered wrong. Even the truck driver, the most important witness, who had seen the black pickup closely tailing Samantha's car, no longer sounded completely certain when re-interviewed toward the end of the year. Maybe I misread the brake lights. That night I was on a long haul. Changes in statements over time are common, but for a case that had lacked evidence from the start, it made everything fade to the point of being almost unreliable. The situation grew worse when the Toyota Corolla, the most important piece of evidence, became the victim of a serious administrative error. In 1993, the San Bernardino County Evidence Storage Facility underwent a full relocation of old evidence to a new warehouse. High-priority cases were flagged, while inactive cases were categorized as passive inventory and given separate color codes. Due to a labeling mistake, Samantha's Toyota was incorrectly coded as belonging to the group of vehicles no longer relevant to criminal cases, the type usually destroyed after 5 years in storage. By May 1995, following standard procedure, the car was moved to a scrapyard responsible for metal destruction and vanished forever, with no one at the department realizing they had just eliminated the most crucial evidence in the Samantha Carter case. When investigator Alvarez discovered this in 1996, he could only sit in front of the file filled with old photographs and faded notes, trying to suppress his frustration. The car that had held so many unanswered questions now existed only as discolored documentation. In the summer of 1997, the case was officially classified as frozen activity, meaning it would only be reviewed if new leads emerged, while active investigation was paused to prioritize more urgent cases. The sheriff's office did not declare the case closed, but almost no personnel remained assigned full-time. During that period, a small event occurred, but did not receive proper attention. In 1997, while a young rookie officer was reviewing old evidence boxes to learn processing procedures, he happened to open the box containing the crime scene photos of Samantha's car. In one close-up photo of the back seat, he noticed something not mentioned in the official report. A small piece of truck carpet, synthetic fiber type, gray-blue in color, flat, apparently stuck to the lower edge of the Corolla's back seat. He marked the photo, made a note, and submitted it to his superior according to protocol. But instead of being added to the main file, the item appeared in the records with an incorrect location description. Instead of noting under the lower edge of the back seat, the entry recorded it as carpet debris near the front passenger footwell. This seemingly minor error had major consequences. It caused the carpet piece to be treated as debris from the front passenger area, where it was far less likely to hold important information, rather than from the back seat, where all the suspicious traces were concentrated. Based on the wrong location, a technician wrote that the carpet sample was unrelated to suspect activity inside the vehicle and filed it as secondary evidence. No technician cross-checked the original photo, and since the car had been destroyed 2 years earlier, the only chance to verify the piece's position and significance was almost completely lost. By the end of 1997, most of Samantha's case file was stored in a single brown cardboard box deep in the warehouse, with faded old labels, hard-to-read handwriting, and scattered timelines. Anyone looking at it then would see a case lacking witnesses, lacking evidence, lacking physical items, and especially lacking a clear investigative direction. But what no one, including investigator Alvarez, knew at the time was that among the notes that seemed like errors, several small clues had been mentioned, but no one had the time to examine closely. The blue fabric fiber once misclassified, the untestable hair DNA sample, the hail note in the technical report, and the truck carpet piece under the back seat recorded in the wrong location. Those fragments at the time were just remnants of an unfinished investigation. It would take many more years, when technology, data, and conditions allowed, for everything to be reassembled and clarified. But during the period from 1991 to 1997, the Samantha Carter case fell into a state of near absolute freeze. No one realizing that these small mistakes were the very pieces that would bring the case back into the light nearly 3 decades later. In the late 1990s and throughout the years that followed, the disappearance of Samantha Carter lay dormant in the cold case archives, occasionally pulled out when a new employee needed to study old procedures in depth, but almost no one touched it seriously. It wasn't until 2005, nearly 15 years after Samantha vanished, that the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department began a program to digitize old files, and a small packet of documents clipped inside the original case folder was rediscovered. The packet contained scattered notes from an early investigator who had retired in the mid-1990s and whom no one clearly remembered how long he had worked on the Samantha file. The notes were not official reports, but quick handwritten lines in faded blue ink, mostly personal impressions from interviewing witnesses or surveying scenes. Among the fragmented lines about cameras, the parking lot, and witnesses, one short passage drew major attention. Hale previously stalked women in the residential area near Glen Helen. Rumor, but unverified. This note had no date, no context, and did not appear in any prior official investigative report. This prompted the file review team to go back through every document related to Richard Hale, the man investigator Alvarez had once considered a potential suspect, though without enough evidence to pursue further in the 1990s. When cross-referencing Hale's name with the county's new databases and Southern California Edison personnel codes, the review team uncovered something else. Hale's personnel file had a locked section, noted as requiring legal department approval for access. Locked files were typically reserved for serious internal complaints, legal disputes, or workplace safety issues. Since this was only a digitization review, the file team lacked authority to open the locked record, but they noted the code number and forwarded a request to SCE's legal department. It took nearly a month for SCE to respond. In a letter to the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, they confirmed there had indeed been an internal complaint against Richard Hale in 1990, but the file was restricted due to involving inappropriate workplace conduct. They did not specify the details. The Sheriff's Department requested a full copy. After several rounds of correspondence, SCE agreed to provide the documents on the condition that the complainant's personal information be redacted under employee protection laws. When the file arrived in late 2005, investigator Alvarez, who was no longer directly assigned to the case but still followed its progress, was called in to review it. The file consisted of 4 typed pages and 2 handwritten statements. It described that 3 months before Samantha Carter disappeared, a female SCE office employee had filed a complaint about a male coworker repeatedly appearing near her car at the end of her shift, following her as she left the parking lot, and once standing in front of the warehouse door late at night when she worked a late shift. She described the individual as tall, broad-shouldered, and often wearing a dark blue SCE jacket. The accused was identified as Richard Hale. In the personnel cross-reference notes, a supervisor wrote, "Hale completely denies. No camera footage to verify. Report retained, but insufficient for discipline." What made investigator Alvarez pause in silence for several seconds was the timing of the complaint. The report was filed in June 1990, just 3 months before Samantha Carter vanished from the Stater Bros Market parking lot. And at that time, Hale's home was only about a 5-minute drive from the supermarket. The early investigators scattered notes. The line about Hale previously stalked women suddenly carried much greater weight. If the SCE female employee had no connection to Samantha and her complaint was unrelated to the disappearance, the similarity in behavior, stalking in parking lots, appearing at shift end times, standing near a woman's car, was impossible to ignore. Alvarez pulled up the stills from the 1990 supermarket camera. The tall figure standing motionless for a long time at the edge of the lot, watching the parking area before Samantha's car left. In his eyes, that silhouette matched the description given by the SCE woman in her complaint. Although the only evidence against Hale remained circumstantial, the emergence of the complaint file, especially one dated just 3 months before the disappearance, made him a person of special interest once again. The fact that the file had been locked at SCE was not proof of guilt. but it showed Richard Hale had once been flagged for inappropriate behavior in his own workplace. And when combined with the coincidence of his proximity to the supermarket on the night Samantha vanished, his unverifiable alibi, and the tall figure in the camera footage, the case which had seemed permanently frozen, began to show new glimmers of light. At the end of SCE's internal file, there was a handwritten line from the manager at the time. Female employee concerned about being followed. Insufficient evidence to act. Recommend monitoring Hale's behavior for a period. That note had never been sent to police in 1990. And if it had been shared at the right time, the original investigation might have taken a very different path. Now, with the information uncovered far too late, investigator Alvarez could only wonder what anyone reading the file would think. Whether Richard Hale was truly just a man who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time, or whether he had been in the crosshairs from the very beginning, only obscured by time, errors, and a file locked away in an SCE cabinet for more than a decade. In 2015, after the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department restructured its cold case unit, a series of old files were selected for reevaluation using new forensic technology. When the list was placed on the table, the name Samantha Carter, missing 1990, appeared in 8th position. Detective Alvarez, by then almost the oldest member of the unit, recognized the name immediately. He had followed this case through the early years of his career, then helplessly watched it freeze due to errors, time, and lack of technology. Now, before him was the opportunity he had waited nearly 3 decades for. Next-generation DNA technology could open doors that in 1990 they lacked the ability to unlock. Alvarez began by rereading the entire original file from the beginning. From scene reports, statements, photographs, to the scattered notes, including the photo with the truck carpet piece that had once been recorded in the wrong location. He marked everything related to the Corolla's back seat, because all the unusual traces were concentrated there. Blue fabric, dampness, shoe print, unknown hair, and the absence of Samantha's fingerprints. In particular, he returned to the Hale note and examined it more closely in this new light. What he had found in the 2005 SCE reevaluation file, the internal complaint continued to tilt his assessment toward the possibility that Richard Hale was involved. But this time, instead of just intuition, he had science backing him. In 2016, Alvarez requested permission from the sheriff's office to transfer all remaining samples to a more advanced DNA lab. Finally, in 2019, he received the green light to send the hair and blue fabric samples to Othram, a leading laboratory in ultra-low copy DNA technology, specializing in extracting DNA from extremely small, very old, or degraded samples. Samantha's hair samples and the hairs collected from the car were separated, but the most important sample remained the short, dark hair found on the seatbelt, the one that in 1990 could not be analyzed because it contained too little DNA. Ultra-low copy DNA technology uses extremely high amplification cycles, boosting the DNA signal to levels old technology could not reach. After weeks of analysis, Othram reported they had extracted a partial genetic profile, male gender, with some markers matching specific population groups. At the same time, the blue fabric fiber reclassified after years of being mistaken for lint was also submitted for fiber analysis. The fabric was identified as polyester of the type used in seat lining or work clothing. This was not enough to identify an individual, but it provided context. Someone who worked in a manual labor environment had sat in Samantha's back seat, or their belongings had been placed there. In late 2020, Othram sent a major update. They had isolated 65% of the male's DNA profile. Not enough for a full CODIS profile, but sufficient to enter into genetic genealogy databases. This was the method that had already solved dozens of high-profile cases nationwide. Instead of searching for a direct criminal match, they looked for distant relatives, often 4th or 5th cousins, then built family trees to identify the most likely individual. When the DNA profile was uploaded to commercial genealogy databases, the first results appeared in just a few weeks. A man living in Arizona who was a distant relative of the DNA sample found in Samantha's car. Not a close relation, but close enough for genealogy experts to see a connection to a family branch in California. Digging deeper into that branch, the genealogy team located 3 men from the same extended family in Riverside County. One of those 3 was a distant relative of Richard Hale. Investigator Alvarez stood almost motionless when he received the genealogy report. This was not incriminating evidence, but it was the first biological link between the DNA sample in Samantha's car and the family of the man he had suspected since 1990. Othram continued expanding the analysis, and in 2022, they produced a more detailed DNA profile. Male, aged 35 to 50 at the time the sample was left. This matched Hale's age in 1990. In 2023, Alvarez collaborated with the genealogy team to construct a complete family tree. They discovered that the DNA in Samantha's car was not Richard Hale's but belonged to a man related to Hale through an old family branch few paid attention to, one that had split off early in the previous century. When cross-referencing ages, residential areas, and travel patterns, only 4 individuals from that branch fit the profile: Richard Hale and 3 distant relatives. The other 3 had solid alibis for 1990. One was living in Colorado, one was serving in the military overseas, and the third resided in Oregon. Only one person lacked a clear alibi: Richard Hale. By March 2024, the Genealogy Institute's comprehensive report was sent to the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department with the conclusion: high probability that the DNA sample found in Samantha's vehicle is related to Richard Hale through the paternal line. This was the first time in 34 years that Richard Hale's name appeared not just in suspicion, but in a scientific report. The case, once frozen for decades, finally had a clear path forward, and Alvarez knew that from here, the investigation would no longer be about reviewing old files. It would shift to directly pursuing the man that modern technology had just pulled back into the light. After the genealogy report from Othram confirmed that the DNA sample recovered from the seatbelt of the Corolla belonged to a man with a paternal line relation to Richard Hale, the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department decided to place Hale under surveillance for the second time. More than 3 decades had passed since the day Samantha vanished, and Richard Hale was now a man nearing 70 years old, living alone in an old house on the edge of the city, less than 4 miles from what used to be the Stater Bros Market parking lot. He had no criminal record, no serious violations in recent files, and years of silence had made him almost disappear from anyone's attention. But in Detective Alvarez's eyes, this was the perfect moment for surveillance. Hale was old enough to be complacent, lived simply enough that every action would stand out, and most importantly, modern DNA technology was powerful enough to turn a tiny trace into compelling evidence. The surveillance began quietly. A team of 4 from the Special Investigations Unit was assigned to monitor Hale for 3 weeks, rotating shifts to observe from a distance with binoculars and vehicle-mounted cameras while logging every routine activity. Times he left and entered the house, trips he took, people he met, stores he visited, and anything he discarded. They had to be completely discreet. If Hale detected he was being followed, they could lose their only chance to legally obtain his DNA. The first week passed with almost nothing noteworthy. Hale lived a regimented life. Mornings at the small supermarket near his home, afternoons in the backyard garage doing minor repairs, evenings watching TV or watering the garden. He rarely left the house for more than 30 minutes. No friends visited, no social activities. To an ordinary person, this was the quiet life of an elderly man. But to the surveillance team, the predictability made observation easier. Any small change would stand out. By the end of the 2nd week, they got their first opportunity. Hale stopped at a small gas station, bought a bottle of water, drank it next to his car, then tossed the empty can into the public trash bin by the entrance. 2 investigators were already waiting in a vehicle across the street, ready for that moment. As Hale drove away, one stepped out, gloved up, approached the bin, and retrieved the water can with long tongs to avoid drawing suspicion. The can was immediately sealed in an evidence bag, placed in a specialized cooler, and rushed to the county DNA lab. 2 days later, the results left the entire room silent for several seconds. The DNA sample from the mouth of the can matched the DNA from the hair found in Samantha's car at 98.6%. Not similar type or same ethnicity. It was a scientific match with extremely high probability that the same man had left DNA on the water can in 2024 and on the seatbelt in the car in 1990. This result was the first solid hit that moved the case into the realm of real evidence, no longer just suspicion, speculation, or vague connections. In front of Detective Alvarez was a clear conclusion. Richard Hale had been inside Samantha Carter's car, or at least had contact with the seatbelt on the night she disappeared. There was no way to explain that match as coincidence. As soon as the result was confirmed a second time by an independent lab, the surveillance team shifted to deeper monitoring of Hale's behavior, this time aiming to locate any remaining physical evidence in his home, especially related to the Ford F-150 he had owned in 1990. One weekend night in the third week, Hale opened his backyard garage and turned on the light. The surveillance team immediately began recording with long-range cameras. In the dim yellow glow, they saw Hale rummaging through a pile of old wooden crates. He pulled out a long, rolled-up object. Dark gray in color, it looked like a piece of truck carpet. The investigator watching through binoculars recognized it was not household carpet. It had thick fiber patterns, typical of pickup truck floor liners from the late 1980s. The observer's heart rate spiked. In the 1990 files, there was a piece of truck carpet once found under the back seat of the Corolla, but misrecorded in location, causing it to be treated as secondary evidence. If the carpet Hale was holding matched that type, it could prove that carpet from Hale's F-150 had come into contact with or been placed in Samantha's car. They needed to verify this, but to do so, they required a search warrant, something they couldn't obtain just because Hale kept an old piece of carpet. Still, the video of Hale opening the garage and handling the carpet was saved to the file. In the nights that followed, the team observed Hale returning to the garage, sitting on a wooden stool, wiping toolboxes while staring at something on the floor. From the camera angle, they couldn't see clearly what he was doing, but his hunched posture and slight tilt of the head toward the garage floor suggested he was examining a fixed object, possibly a cabinet or a covered section of the floor. One investigator noted, "Repeated behavior. Appears he is checking something buried, hidden under the garage floor." The note was forwarded to Alvarez the next morning. As he read the surveillance report, he understood that between the DNA match, the suspicious behavior, and the old truck carpet, they were getting very close to building legal grounds for a search warrant on Hale's home. But Alvarez knew they had to proceed with extreme caution. Any misstep at this stage could ruin 3 decades of waiting. The 3-week surveillance ended with a report over 60 pages long detailing Hale's behavior, including the key points: the 98.6% DNA match, the object resembling old truck carpet, Hale's repeated checks of the garage floor, and his near-isolated lifestyle. When Alvarez reached the final page, he set the report down, folded his arms, and realized the investigation was entering a phase where every decision could lead to answers about the day Samantha vanished, or send everything back into silence, like in 1990. But this time, he had no intention of letting the case slip away. Never before had Hale been placed under such strong suspicion, and never before had science stood this close to the answer. After the 3-week surveillance report was completed, along with the DNA match at 98.6% probability, Detective Alvarez understood that it was time to shift from passive observation to legal action. He submitted a request for a search warrant on Richard Hale's home, attaching all the evidence accumulated over more than 3 decades. The DNA sample, the internal SCE notes, the 1990 complaint report, recent surveillance footage of the garage, and the genealogy analysis, linking the DNA back to Hale's family line. The district attorney's office took 2 days to review and finally approved it. Hale was a valid suspect, with solid DNA grounds, and his garage was considered a likely location for evidence related to Samantha Carter's disappearance. On the morning the warrant took effect, a small SWAT team, along with the forensics unit, gathered at the end of the street leading to Hale's house. The atmosphere was tense, but no one spoke loudly. They had waited years for this moment. When Hale opened his garage door at exactly 7:12 a.m., as part of his daily routine, the SWAT team moved in, announced the search warrant, and directed him to step aside. Hale remained suspiciously calm, offering no resistance, simply crossing his arms and leaning against the kitchen door frame, his eyes showing not surprise but the look of someone watching an administrative procedure. The forensics team immediately spread out into the garage, the place where the previous 3 weeks of surveillance had shown Hale spent most of his time. Powerful high-intensity lights made every speck of dust, every oil stain, every crack in the garage floor clearly visible. On the back wall, hanging from 2 old iron hooks, was a large piece of truck carpet partially rolled up, with torn edges. A technician lowered it and spread it out on the floor. Under the lights, the synthetic gray-blue fibers became clear, identical to the type used in late 1980s Ford Phone 150 seconds. But what made the entire team pause was the torn edge. The shape of the tear matched the size of the small carpet piece, once found under the back seat of Samantha's Corolla, the piece that had been misrecorded in location in the 1990 files. The technician immediately compared the 2 samples side by side. The 1990 photo of the small piece and the current torn edge. The torn fibers, tear length, and fiber direction showed an almost perfect match. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood that if the 2 samples matched completely in lab analysis, it would mean Hale's truck carpet had come into contact with the interior of Samantha's car. Near the carpet roll, an old small cardboard box sat in the corner of a tool cabinet. Inside was a paper map of the San Bernardino area printed in 1989, with torn edges and only half the eastern corner remaining. When the technician unfolded the map, they saw the tear pattern resembled the torn piece of map once recovered from Samantha's car in 1990. That map, one of the lesser-focused pieces of evidence at the time, had been logged as a torn section of a route map. Now, the 2 torn pieces, one from Hale's garage, one once in Samantha's car, fit together like 2 halves of a split puzzle. It could not be seen as coincidence. Alvarez stood silent for several seconds at this discovery. The torn map in Samantha's car had not been considered a major clue 3 decades earlier, but now finding the other half in Hale's garage felt like direct confirmation that what happened the night Samantha vanished involved not just the car, but the man standing right in front of them. As the forensics team continued searching the tool cabinets, they found a roll of silver duct tape, thick and wide with diagonal striping matching the type found in the supermarket parking lot in 1990. The roll had been partially used, with a torn edge showing fiber fraying similar to the small piece of tape collected at the original scene. The similarity was carefully documented, but lab analysis would be needed to confirm adhesive composition and weave type match. Meanwhile, the technical team began examining the garage floor, the area where surveillance videos showed Hale repeatedly checking. At first they saw nothing special beyond a few oil stains and dust. But when scanning with angled lights across the surface, they noticed a section of concrete with a different coloration, faintly mottled, about 1 square meter in size, located right where Hale often sat in the videos. New and old concrete differ in tone, but even when aged, the shade difference was clear under proper lighting. This section, upon close inspection, had uneven texture, as if it had been patched or poured over an older area. A technician lightly tapped it with a rubber mallet, and the echo sounded different from the rest of the floor, hollower, deeper. This made the whole team look at each other in silence. No one was allowed to dig without a warrant, but everyone understood one thing: the garage floor had been repaired at some point. When asked about it, Hale simply replied in an indifferent tone, "I repaired the floor years ago. The garage had cracks." The short, calm answer made the atmosphere even heavier. Alvarez immediately noted in his notebook, "Need supplemental warrant to excavate garage floor." The search continued for another 2 hours. They checked every cardboard box, every toolbox, every item in the garage and adjacent storage room. In an old drawer, they found a small bag containing screws, zippers, and a few pieces of dark blue polyester fabric, identical to the type recovered from the back seat of the Corolla. The pieces were so small they could have been dismissed as trash without context. But now, with the blue fabric in Samantha's car and the matching type, everything seemed to fit into a logical chain. Someone wearing clothing or handling items with this fabric had sat in the back seat or placed something there. And that someone according to the DNA report, was biologically related to Richard Hale himself. The search uncovered no blood, no weapons, no objects capable of causing injury, but the important thing was that such items weren't needed to prove involvement. The clues found in the garage, the torn truck carpet matching the piece in Samantha's car, the torn map fitting the old fragment, the matching type of duct tape, the identical dark blue polyester fibers, and especially the patched concrete floor, all were pieces impossible to ignore in a disappearance spanning more than 30 years. As the investigation team packed up equipment, sealed evidence, and took Hale to the station for further questioning, Detective Alvarez walked slowly through the garage one last time. He looked down at the mottled concrete section, where the light reflected in a faint haze. Over many years, so much had been erased by time tire tracks, blurry figures in cameras, vanished fingerprints, but this floor, with its uneven concrete tone, remained, and it was telling a story that he knew they had to find a way to hear completely. After the initial search concluded and the suspicious patched area of the garage floor was documented, Detective Alvarez immediately filed for a supplemental search warrant, specifically one allowing excavation and full removal of the abnormal concrete section in Richard Hale's garage. The warrant was approved within 48 hours, based on strong probable cause. The DNA match from the water can, the torn truck carpet matching the piece found in Samantha's car, the matching torn map sections, the identical type of duct tape, and especially the 3 weeks of surveillance video showing Hale repeatedly checking the exact suspicious floor area. On Tuesday morning, the forensics team and a specialized excavation unit arrived with concrete saws, ground-penetrating radar, and bore scopes at the garage. Hale was escorted outside and seated under the watch of 2 officers. He said nothing, offered no protest, and simply watched the investigation team as if observing a procedure that had nothing to do with him. When the ground-penetrating scanner activated, the images showed the concrete section had abnormal void space flat on top, but with a cavity below, extending more than 40 degrees wider than a normal floor. This reinforced the suspicion that something had been buried beneath and later sealed with concrete. The concrete cutting team began sawing along the edges of the abnormal area. The saw noise echoed, concrete dust filled the air, but when the first sections were lifted, the underlying concrete layer was noticeably thinner than the rest, confirming the top surface had been added later. Once the concrete was thin enough, a technician used a pry bar to lift a large slab. Under powerful lights, the underside of the slab appeared, and directly beneath the sand layer was the top of a metal container. It was about 1.2 meters long, nearly half a meter wide, painted faded gray with rusted edges. A container buried in the garage floor, something no investigator wanted to see, yet exactly what they feared. 4 technicians removed the slab and carefully excavated the soil around the container. When it was lifted out with specialized straps and placed in the center of the garage, no one spoke. The container was heavier than expected, indicating it held multiple items or objects with significant, stable weight. The latch was rusted, but still operable with tools. When the lid was opened, a puff of old dust escaped, and the smell of long-sealed metal filled the air. Inside, arranged deliberately and neatly, were the first 3 items that left everyone frozen. A women's light brown jacket from the late 1980s style. A thick piece of truck carpet, synthetic fabric matching the type recovered from Samantha's car, and a bundle of gray industrial strapping cord, the kind used in heavy transport or restraint cases. The jacket was carefully folded. The fabric was frayed at the edges but still retained its color. When a technician gently opened the collar with tweezers, the inner label appeared. Morris & Bell. Women's outerwear. This label matched the brand of jacket Samantha's family had reported missing during the 1990 investigation. The family had described Samantha often wearing this brown jacket when leaving evening shifts because desert nights cooled quickly. Finding the jacket in a container buried under Hale's floor after 34 years was evidence so powerful it needed no explanation. Next to the jacket, the spread-out truck carpet piece was much larger than the torn fragment found in the Corolla. When comparing its edge to the 1990 photo, the technician needed only seconds to see the tear matched perfectly with the missing section on the small piece. It was a durable synthetic fiber, and when the 2 pieces were placed together, The fiber strands, tear angle, and weave pattern aligned. This nearly confirmed that the truck carpet under Samantha's backseat had originated from the carpet Hale kept, or at least from the same set in the vehicle he owned. Alvarez watched the scene and understood the evidence was assembling its own story. Samantha's car, Hale's truck carpet, the container buried under Hale's floor, all finally connecting. The bundle of strapping cord in the container was the third item examined. This type of cord was common in installation and utility industries, but the core and braiding could be analyzed for manufacturer. The forensic investigators scanned light across the cord surface and spotted dark blue polyester fibers adhered to it, matching the color of the fabric fibers found on the Corolla's back seat. What weighed even heavier on the room was the very bottom of the container. When the technician lifted a thin oil paper layer, a small plastic bag appeared, containing numerous fiber fragments, some polymer scraps, and sealed with old tape. This bag was not related to Samantha, but held microfibers mixed with almost completely degraded biological traces. Everything was sealed and sent for testing. Preliminary lab results, returned that same afternoon, made the entire team pause. The biological sample in the plastic bag did not fully match Samantha, but showed markers belonging to a male individual who died of unknown causes and went missing in San Bernardino in 1994, a separate case that had been logged but never solved. 2 different disappearances, 2 different times, yet the second person's DNA traces were found in the container buried under Richard Hale's floor. This not only expanded the scope of the Samantha Carter case, but suggested Hale might have been involved in more than one disappearance spanning decades. As the container was closed and all evidence sealed, afternoon light filtered into the garage, shining on the empty pit where the container had lain. That void was not just a removed concrete hole, it was a window into years hidden by the silence of a man who had lived as if nothing had happened for over 30 years. And as the forensics team carried the container out of the garage, Detective Alvarez stood watching in silence. 34 years searching for answers, and now, Hale's own floor had spoken. 1 container, 1 jacket, 1 piece of carpet, 1 bundle of cord, and traces of another missing person, all saying the same thing. The Samantha Carter case was never an isolated disappearance, and this was only the surface of what remained beneath the silence held for 3 decades. After the container was excavated from the garage floor and all the new evidence was sent to the forensics lab, Detective Alvarez and the investigation team gathered in a large room at the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. On the wall was a timeline board stretching almost the full width of the room, detailing every minute of the evening Samantha disappeared in 1990. The old writings, faded arrows, and long pasted notes were now replaced by a new, clearer, and more detailed timeline, thanks to the evidence just uncovered. Alvarez stood in front of the board, red marker in hand. "Now we reconstruct the night of September 14th, 1990, he said, his voice low but steady. "No longer based on guesses, based on what science and witnesses have confirmed." He started at 8:50 p.m. Samantha clocked out, said goodbye to her coworker. Slightly anxious mood confirmed by witnesses in multiple interviews. By 9:08 p.m., Samantha called her mother as she walked into the parking lot. The call cut off abruptly after a few seconds, possibly when she sensed someone watching. The supermarket camera recorded a figure standing motionless at the edge of the lot about 3 minutes earlier. Cross-referencing with the SCE complaint file and the figure's build in the footage, the likelihood that the shadow was Richard Hale was higher than ever. Next, Alvarez marked 9:10 to 9:12 p.m., the window when surrounding traffic cameras all malfunctioned simultaneously. This was the critical period, because the moment Samantha's car left, the lot fell within it. Footage from the electronics store camera captured headlights resembling a 1988 Corolla appearing at 9:14 p.m., heading toward Devore completely opposite Samantha's route home. The truck driver on the I-215 confirmed seeing a black pickup closely tailing and forcing the Corolla to veer off just before the on-ramp. The match between the witness statement and forensics from the tire tracks in the lot reinforced that Samantha's car was forced out of position rather than leaving voluntarily. Alvarez drew a long red arrow across the board. 9:12 p.m. car forced to stop. Based on forensic tire track evidence, they concluded the Corolla was forced to stop at the lot's edge, then driven by someone else. The hair not belonging to Samantha on the seatbelt indicated the driver was male. The DNA from the hair in 2024 proved it. Richard Hale drove the Corolla, Alvarez said. But what about the back seat? At this point, the blue polyester fibers, strange dampness, and large shoe print behind the driver's seat were projected on the screen. Forensics technicians concluded the back seat had held a person or object that night. But no fingerprints from Samantha. This proved one thing precisely. Samantha did not sit in the back. Someone else did. Alvarez circled the back seat area on the vehicle interior diagram. Second person. The team already knew Hale had relatives, and the DNA in the car matched his family line. But if Hale was in the Corolla's driver's seat, who was in the back? The answer that had eluded them for 3 decades finally emerged when a young forensics video technician found something no one in the 1990s could see. In the traffic camera footage previously dismissed as unusable due to noise, a single frame, zoomed to 400%, revealed 2 shadows next to the Corolla, not one. One standing close to the driver's door, one behind the vehicle. They were not clear figures, but the height, shoulder width, and positioning created a motion pattern consistent with 2 people blocking the car. Alvarez looked at the screen and added to the timeline. 9:11 p.m., 2 individuals approached the car. This was when the name Dalton appeared. Dalton was a distant relative of Hale, from the same family branch identified through genealogy analysis. In 1990, Dalton was 28 years old, lived unstably, sometimes in California, sometimes in Nevada. The genealogy record showed Dalton was the only person besides Hale whose paternal markers matched the weak DNA sample from the Corolla's back seat. When overlaying Dalton's known movements from 1990 onto a San Bernardino map, his location the night Samantha disappeared overlapped with the area near Hale's old home. No direct evidence at the time, but when compared to the blurry traffic camera frame, the shadow behind the Corolla fit Dalton's build better. Nearly 5 centimeters taller than Hale, narrower shoulders, and standing offset to the left side of the car, matching the pattern of someone moving from the back seat. 9:12 to 9:14 p.m. was considered the decisive moment. Samantha's car forced to stop. Hale took the driver's seat. Dalton opened the back door, removed or placed something inside. Then, both left Hale driving. Dalton, following in the pickup. This aligned with the truck driver's statement. The Corolla forced off course, then driven by someone, with the pickup staying close behind. Next, the timeline showed 9:22 p.m., the estimated time the Corolla left the city area and headed into Devore. Just 4 days later, the car was found parked neatly with the driver's door ajar. No signs of ransacking but unusual dampness on the back seat. Forensic investigators concluded that from Hale's garage surveillance habits, the torn carpet piece, and the buried container, it was highly likely the truck carpet and whatever had been on the back seat were collected and taken back to the garage, then buried in the container. Forensics reinforced this when the polyester fibers on the back seat matched perfectly with fibers on the strapping cord found in the container. Alvarez wrote on the board. 16 to 18 minutes after leaving the supermarket, Sakura Drive, Devore Road stopped the car. Transfer item. If the forensic analysis was correct, Samantha may have been moved from the Corolla to Hale's or Dalton's pickup at a point north of the city. The Corolla was then driven to the discovery location and abandoned to mislead the investigation. The timeline also included 9:30 p.m., when traffic cameras resumed functioning, and there was no footage of the Corolla returning to the city area. This confirmed the Corolla traveled only one way. When Alvarez finished reconstructing the timeline, in the silent room, everything was clearer than ever. Hale did not act alone. The DNA evidence, carpet piece locations, fabric fibers, shoe prints, traffic camera footage, and genealogy reports all led to the same conclusion. 2 men were involved. And the second man, who had existed only as a shadow for so long now, had a name: Dalton. Alvarez stepped back and looked at the full diagram. The scattered pieces from 34 years finally formed a logical sequence. Samantha left the supermarket, stalked, Blocked, forced away, transferred to another vehicle, evidence collected, traces buried, but not completely erased. And now, the truth was emerging with the two shadows next to the Corolla in 1990, something no one had the technology to see back then. But it was time to confront the second person, and the next path would be finding Dalton, the man who might hold the final answer to that fateful night. 3 weeks after successfully reconstructing the 1990 timeline, the arrest warrant application for Richard Hale was formally submitted to the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office. The legal grounds far exceeded the reasonable suspicion standard. 98.6% DNA match, evidence inside the container, matching torn truck carpet, torn map sections fitting the one from Samantha's car, matching fabric fibers, and camera evidence showing two individuals beside the Corolla. When the warrant was signed, a SWAT unit was mobilized. Due to Hale's unpredictable nature, a man who had owned more than a dozen firearms in the 1980s and 90s, though age now made him appear slower. At 4:55 a.m., with morning fog still lingering, the SWAT team surrounded Hale's old house on a quiet street in the San Bernardino outskirts. Helmet-mounted flashlight beams swept across the front yard filled with tools and rusted items. The team leader signaled. Moments later, the loudspeaker boomed. "Richard Hale, this is the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. We have an arrest warrant. Come out immediately." Silence for a few seconds. Then the front door cracked open. Hale stood in the doorway, wearing a thin jacket, his posture showing nothing like someone preparing to resist armed forces. He raised his hands without a word. SWAT moved in, subdued him, cuffed him, and read his Miranda rights. His eyes showed no fear or shock, just a calm gaze, almost expectant. As Hale was placed in the vehicle, Alvarez observed him from a distance. Something in Hale's silent stance made him feel like the man had been mentally prepared for this day for a very long time. Hale was taken to an interrogation room, but for the first 3 hours, he remained completely silent. Every question, from Samantha's whereabouts to explanations about the container, was met with a blank stare. Not defiance, not anxiety, like someone who had decided silence was the only option. Faced with this deadlock, Alvarez shifted to the second investigative front, locating Dalton. Dalton, the distant relative indicated in the blurry 1990 traffic camera, was known to have lived a transient life, but genealogy information led the pursuit team to a current address, a low-rent complex in Victorville. The arrest team approached in the late afternoon. When they knocked, Dalton, now in his 50s, hair streaked gray, thin and gaunt, opened the door in confusion. He didn't run, didn't react strongly. When read the arrest warrant on charges of aiding serious criminal activity related to the disappearance of Samantha Carter, his face went pale. I didn't think that would ever come back," he said softly, more to himself than to the police. In stark contrast to Hale's total silence, Dalton nearly collapsed from the moment he entered the interrogation room. When Alvarez walked in, he saw Dalton hunched over, hands trembling. Alvarez sat across from him and placed the file on the table. "Do you know what we found under Hale's garage floor?" Dalton stayed quiet. Alvarez laid out photos of the container, Samantha's jacket, the carpet, the strapping cord, and finally, the DNA report. When the container photo was placed on the table, Dalton recoiled, eyes turning red. He bit his lip, took a deep breath, then spoke in a hazy voice, as if recalling a memory locked away for years. "I didn't think he did those things. I just helped move stuff. I didn't know." The fragmented words were enough to open the door Alvarez had been waiting for. "Move what, Dalton?" Alvarez asked. Dalton closed his eyes for a moment, then began to speak, his voice choking as if turning over the years he most wanted to forget. He said that on the night Samantha disappeared, Hale had called him over with the reason need help transferring stuff from one vehicle to another. Dalton thought it was tools or construction materials. When he arrived, he saw Hale's F-150 parked farther from the house than usual, with the silver Corolla stopped beside it. Hale was standing by the Corolla's back seat. Dalton didn't clearly remember the face of anyone inside, only saw the shape of an object wrapped in a jacket or light-colored fabric. He believed it was just heavy cargo to load onto the truck. Hale didn't let him unwrap it. Dalton said, "I just did what he asked. I thought it was stuff he needed to haul somewhere else. I didn't know it was." Alvarez watched his reactions. No clear signs of lying, no typical defensiveness. This was the account of someone who had carried guilt for years, even though he didn't know what he was involved in at the time. When asked about the container, Dalton admitted helping Hale carry a heavy object like a metal box into the garage a few days later. "He told me not to ask. I didn't ask." Everything matched the forensics. The container, truck carpet, strapping cord, jacket, but the most critical detail emerged when Alvarez asked, "Did Hale know Samantha before she disappeared?" Dalton hesitated longer than before answering. Then he looked up, eyes bloodshot but clearer. He was watching her. "I saw him at the supermarket parking lot a few times. Must have been 2 months before that." Alvarez didn't break eye contact. 2 months before the night she vanished? Dalton nodded, hands clenched tight. He said it was to repair power lines in the area, but I saw he wasn't carrying tools, just standing and watching. Every few days he'd drive by. I thought he liked her. I didn't think it was that. Dalton stopped, trying to swallow. I didn't think it was like this. That statement, simple but horrifying, placed a new milestone in the case. Not a chance encounter with Samantha, not an impulsive carjacking. He had stalked her for 2 months, exactly matching the internal SCE complaint about him stalking a female coworker. A repeated behavioral pattern. Dalton continued cooperating, providing locations where he had met Hale during those 2 months, describing the exact F-150, Hale's habit of standing at the lot's edge, the exact position where the supermarket camera once captured the figure. He even remembered Hale carrying a roll of duct tape identical to the type found in the garage, a detail forensics later confirmed. When the interrogation ended, Alvarez stepped out of the room with a very clear feeling. The story from 34 years ago had finally been unlocked. Hale remained silent, but Dalton could no longer carry the secret. And his statement didn't just match the container, carpet, and DNA. It matched the truth that all the evidence had pointed toward for 30 years. Hale was not just the last person connected to Samantha. He was the one who had planned it from the start. And Dalton, who thought he was just helping move stuff now, became the key witness, bringing the rest of the truth into the light. After Dalton's full statement was recorded, all the new evidence was transferred to the San Bernardino County Forensic Center for a final series of analyses. The series that Detective Alvarez believed would close this 34-year-old chain once and for all. Forensics began by reconstructing the evidence system from small to large. DNA, microfibers, truck carpet, container, timeline, and witness statements. Each specialist team handled one part, but all aimed at one core question. Did everything fit together in a single logical pattern? The results were so clear, they were almost brutal. The DNA from the water can Hale discarded at the gas station matched at 98.6% with the DNA from the hair recovered on the Corolla's seatbelt in 1990. When next-generation technology performed deeper analysis using multi-point amplification, the match rate rose to near absolute within genetic comparison limits. Forensics confirmed. The same man touched the seatbelt and drank from the can. Probability of error is so low it can be considered zero. The blue polyester fiber samples from the Corolla's back seat were examined under an electron microscope. The weave pattern, fiber thickness, and dye markers matched the samples taken from the strapping cord in the container and fibers caught in Hale's truck carpet. Individual microfiber coating showed they belonged to the same production batch, meaning the same origin, and used in the same time period. Moreover, when compared to old SCE employee protective jackets from the 1980s, this polyester fabric matched the material SCE once issued to field workers. This piece reinforced the conclusion that when Hale was in the Corolla, his clothing brushed against the back seat, leaving fibers that lasted 34 years. The truck carpet piece under the Corolla's back seat was nearly a perfect match to the torn edge on the Ford F-150 carpet set found in Hale's garage. Forensics used tier-edge matching techniques similar to those in cases involving torn paper or fabric, concluding that the two pieces belonged to the same mat and the tear occurred from diagonal pulling force, consistent with friction, as an object was dragged across the back seat. This aligned perfectly with Dalton's statement that he helped Hale pull something from the Corolla's back seat onto the truck. The metal container was processed with nanoscale trace analysis. Results revealed 36 different microfiber types, but 3 groups matched evidence from the Corolla: blue polyester, fibers from Samantha's jacket, and microfibers from the truck carpet. The container surface held degraded DNA matching the profile of the male who disappeared in 1994, identified in the very bottom layer. This established an additional chain. Hale had not buried one piece of evidence but multiple pieces from multiple cases in the same container. When cross-referencing the timeline, forensics reconstructed the movement model of the 2 vehicles, Corolla and F-150, on the night of September 14, 1990. The 9:10 to 9:14 p.m. window fit perfectly with the car being forced to stop. The driver replaced, an object transferred to another vehicle, and the Corolla left in Devore. The blurry 1990 camera footage, processed with 2024 AI enhancement technology, showed 2 shadows, one figure in front matching Hale's height, the rear figure closely resembling Dalton's body parameters. Every small forensic piece pointed to the same single pattern, a pattern that could not be created by coincidence. When the forensic reports were compiled, Alvarez spent a long afternoon reading them all. What weighed on him was not the evidence against Hale, those were too clear, but the motive. Why did Hale choose Samantha? Why her, a 22-year-old woman working evening shifts at a supermarket, become the target? Digging deeper into SCE records from that period, behavioral analysis forensics uncovered a notable factor. The power line route Hale was responsible for, from July to September 1990, passed right by the Stater Bros Market and several residential areas where Samantha lived. Hale had a legitimate reason to drive around that area, but the unusually repeated presence, combined with multiple statements that he had watched women in parking lots, revealed a multi-phase stalking behavioral pattern. The motive was not random, not impulsive, it was targeted selection based on habitual access from his job. When confronted with the DNA evidence, truck carpet, torn map, and container, Hale broke his silence for the first time. He tried to shift the investigation, claiming Dalton drove the Corolla and that Dalton was the one who used the carpet and container. I had nothing to do with it. But forensics completely refuted it. Dalton had no DNA on the Corolla seatbelt. The DNA on the belt was Hale's. Dalton had no SCE uniform-type polyester fibers on him in 1990. Hale did. Dalton's statement that he never sat in the Corolla but only stood behind the truck matched the backseat forensics. No Dalton DNA there. The shoe prints in the parking lot did not match Dalton's shoes, based on tread patterns compared to 1990 photos. The container had Hale's fingerprints, though degraded, still identifiable by ridge characteristics. And most importantly, the 2-month stalking pattern did not come from Dalton. It came from Hale, confirmed by the SCE complaint and Dalton's statement. Everything wove together like perfectly aligned stitches on a forensic map. DNA fibers, carpet container, vehicle movement, Dalton's statement, stalking behavior timeline, all forming a 100% consistent model. No gaps, no ambiguities, no reason to suspect anyone else. When Alvarez reviewed the full forensic compilation a second time, he set down his pen and let out a long breath, not from relief, but from finally seeing the complete picture after 34 years. Science did not just say Hale was involved. Science said no one else had ever been in Samantha's car. No one else buried the container. No one else stalked Samantha for 2 straight months. And now, Hale could no longer pin it on Dalton, because forensics had laid out the truth in a way no statement could overturn. The Samantha Carter case, once frozen in ice for more than 3 decades, had finally been clarified by every fiber, every DNA molecule, every tear on a piece of carpet, and the powerless silence of a man trying to shift blame but with nowhere left to hide. The trial of Richard Hale opened in April 2025 at the San Bernardino County Superior Court, drawing large crowds of media, the victim's family, and those who had followed the case for 3 decades. The courtroom carried an atmosphere that was both solemn and heavy, as if all 34 years of the past were sitting in every spectator seat. Richard Hale, hair completely white, thin build but eyes still sharp and cold, was brought into the courtroom in an orange prison jumpsuit. He looked at no one, not the Samantha family, not Dalton, the relative who had stood beside him the night Samantha disappeared, who had now chosen to cooperate with the prosecution and sat in the witness row, face gaunt but calm. The prosecutor opened the trial by presenting the full forensic timeline, a massive assembly of science, technology, and testimony that sealed every minute of the night of September 14, 1990. From Samantha's abruptly cut-off phone call to the simultaneous 7-minute malfunction of surrounding traffic cameras, to the DNA on the seatbelt matching Hale's DNA from the water can in 2024, to the torn truck carpet pieces fitting perfectly with the one in Hale's garage, to the 2 torn map sections joining into one, to the metal container buried under the garage floor containing Samantha's jacket, the bundle of strapping cord, matching polyester fibers, and DNA from the 1994 missing person. Each piece of evidence was projected on the large screen, zoomed in on every detail. The tear lines on the carpet, the blue fibers, the scratches on the Corolla's back seat, the blurry figures in the VHS camera footage enhanced by AI technology. Then came Dalton's testimony, the final piece that made the entire truth seamless. Dalton took the witness stand with a slight tremble, but his voice steady. He recounted how Hale called him that night to help move stuff, how Hale stood by the Corolla's back seat, telling him not to uncover the fabric wrapping the object, how he helped lift the heavy item onto Hale's pickup, and days later helped carry the metal container into the garage. Dalton admitted his own responsibility, acknowledging that he had aided even without realizing the severity. Because of this full cooperation, the prosecution recommended reducing Dalton's charges to aiding unlawful evidence handling, rather than indirect involvement in the disappearance. When the prosecutor asked the final question, "Do you believe Hale was stalking Samantha before the night she disappeared?" Dalton nodded and answered, "He stood in the supermarket parking lot for weeks. I saw it with my own eyes." The entire courtroom fell silent. Hale's defense attorney focused on the only strategy left, trying to shift full responsibility to Dalton. They argued that Hale's DNA in the car could have come from prior contact, that the carpet could have been taken by Dalton from Hale's truck without his consent, that the container does not prove Hale buried it himself. But every argument was refuted by forensics. The DNA could only appear on the seatbelt the moment someone sat in the driver's seat. The perfectly matching tear edges were 100% physical evidence. The container bore Hale's degraded fingerprints, and the VHS camera, though blurry, still showed 2 figures beside the Corolla. When the defense tried to focus on the unidentifiable shadows, the video forensics expert stood and answered simply, "We do not use shadows to identify people. We use DNA, and the DNA has spoken clearly." The next day, the prosecution called an FBI behavioral analysis expert who presented Hale's repeated stalking pattern, the internal SCE complaint from 1990, his multiple appearances in the supermarket parking lot without tools, the power line route he managed overlapping Samantha's daily path. When the expert concluded, Hale selected targets based on repeated opportunity. Samantha was not a random victim. The courtroom atmosphere tightened to the point where every breath felt held in the chest. Hale's attorney objected multiple times, but each objection was overruled by scientific data. The physical evidence, DNA, and Dalton's cooperating testimony had built a structure too tight to break. When all the evidence had been presented, the jury retired to deliberate. No one knew how long they would take. Cases spanning decades often make juries hesitate, but the forensics this time were so clear, they left almost no room for doubt. Just 8 hours later, the deliberation room door opened. Everyone stood. The foreperson read the verdict. Guilty, on all counts. Richard Hale kept his face expressionless, said nothing, did not bow his head, did not look at anyone. He stood there like a stone statue, but that silence held no power anymore. As the judge ordered him removed from the courtroom to await sentencing, Samantha's family embraced, many breaking into tears. Alvarez stood at the back of the room, eyes lowered to the thick file in his hands, knowing that finally the truth had been brought back into the light after 34 years. And science with every fiber, Every DNA molecule and every seemingly tiny trace had spoken the final word. The sentencing hearing took place on a morning in June 2025, nearly 35 years after Samantha Carter vanished from the Stater Bros Market parking lot. The courtroom was packed, with familiar faces from the decades-long investigation mixed in the crowd. Samantha's family, officers who had worked the case in 1990, early investigators now retired, and young students wanting to witness the end of one of San Bernardino's longest cold cases. Richard Hale stood before the court, hands cuffed, face cold as stone. He said nothing as the judge read the sentence. No reaction, no trembling, just staring into empty space as if standing outside his own life. The sentence was announced in a steady, decisive voice. Richard Hale is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the crimes of aggravated kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, unlawful evidence handling, and causing serious harm resulting in death. Though Samantha's body was never found, California law allows conviction based on the chain of physical evidence, DNA, the container, Dalton's testimony, and the forensic timeline that matched every minute. When the judge read the words "no basis for parole," a sob escaped from the Carter family row. The entire courtroom fell completely silent as Hale was escorted out, steps slow but rigid, still holding the emotionless gaze that had followed him for decades. A few minutes later, Dalton was brought up to hear his sentence. Throughout the investigation, he had cooperated fully, providing testimony consistent with forensics, guiding the team to key locations, and clarifying details no physical evidence could speak for itself. The prosecution recommended significant leniency for his secondary role, lack of intent to harm, and ignorance of the nature of the events in 1990. The judge agreed. Dalton received 12 years in prison for aiding unlawful evidence, handling, and obstruction of justice in the aftermath. Upon hearing the sentence, he nodded slightly, like someone finally releasing a burden carried for over 30 years. He turned toward Samantha's family, saying no words of apology, but his eyes said it all. Remorse beyond measure. After the trial, the San Bernardino County Sheriff held the largest press conference in years. He stood in the packed briefing room, behind him a board reading Cold Case Division Reinvestigation Directive. His voice rang clear. Because of evidence, Hale stalked women in multiple residential areas. And because the container found under his garage held DNA from a missing person case in 1994, we will reopen 120 cold cases occurring within Hale's operational range from 1985 to 1998. The number caused the room to erupt in murmurs. A reporter asked, "Are you saying all 120 could be linked to Hale?" The sheriff replied directly, "Not all. But many share similar elements, women disappearing near power line routes, near areas Hale oversaw, or with signs of stalking." He acknowledged this would be the largest reinvestigation in county history, but the biggest shock did not come from that announcement. It came from the final forensic report, a document reporters only glimpsed, but which immediately caused ripples. In the container buried under Hale's garage floor, besides Samantha's jacket, besides the Ford F-150 truck carpet piece, besides the polyester fibers and the 1994 missing person's DNA, forensics discovered one more unknown hair. Not very long, no root, just over 1 inch. The hair was heavily degraded but still had enough keratin structure for analysis. When the lab ran the DNA profile, the result was a single line. No match to any victim in California state databases. No match to any victim in national databases. No match to any reported missing person. An unidentified hair. No name. No identity. No file. No match to any open or closed case. It did not belong to Samantha. Not to the 1994 victim. Not to Hale or Dalton. It belonged to someone never reported, never entered into records, a person whom, until the container was opened, no one knew had ever existed in this story. Forensics noted in the report, hair sample may belong to an unidentified victim. At the press conference, a reporter stood and asked, "Sheriff, does that mean Hale could have more victims?" The sheriff gripped his hands lightly in front of the microphone. "We do not draw conclusions without evidence, but we do not rule out any possibility. Even the possibility of more unverified victims?" The sheriff looked straight at the rows of reporters, eyes resolute. The investigation is not over. As the press conference ended, murmurs spread through the hallways, then the entire city. A criminal once thought nameless, living among the community for 34 years, like a harmless old man, now exposed as the figure behind one of the longest disappearance cases in history. And the container buried under the garage floor like a metal coffin holding the past had left a mystery that even a life sentence could not fully lock away. Samantha's story was closed, but the final question about the nameless hair opened another door. During the 3 decades Hale walked free, were Samantha and the 1994 victim the only names? Or beneath that garage concrete did Hale bury more secrets? Secrets that now the entire community, the forensic field, and those who never knew they were searching for someone would have to keep pursuing? The end of the trial was not a period. It was only the beginning of a larger, deeper, wider pursuit. A pursuit into the shadow of a man whose silence lasted all the way to his final hearing. And San Bernardino, after 34 years, finally knew the story had never truly ended. The story of Samantha Carter and the case that spanned more than 3 decades in San Bernardino is not just a criminal tragedy. It reflects issues that Americans today still face. Complacency in public spaces, dangerous gaps in old surveillance systems, and especially the terrifying silence that can shield predators right in the middle of a community. Samantha vanished just minutes after walking into a dark parking lot, in a moment where better lighting, clearer cameras, or an alert bystander intervening might have changed everything. Hale stalking her for 2 months without anyone noticing reminds us that personal safety is never guaranteed. In today's America, where supermarkets, malls, and parking lots remain hotspots for many attacks, staying vigilant, scanning surroundings, and trusting one's instincts like the moment Samantha felt someone's watching me are things that cannot be ignored. The story also shows that modern forensic science, like ultra-low-copy DNA analysis or genetic genealogy, has become a powerful tool for solving cases thought forever forgotten. This reminds us of the value in preserving data, reports, and never giving up even when things seem hopeless. Finally, Dalton's testimony, a man who lived with guilt for 34 years, reminds us that silence can prolong tragedy more than any crime. If you see something unusual in public, at work, or in your neighborhood, speak up. One call, one report, or even one reminder could save a life. In America's vast and sometimes indifferent society, individual awareness remains the first and most important line of defense against danger. Thank you for following the 34-year journey to uncover the truth in the Samantha Carter case. If you found value in these analyses, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. See you in the next video, where we continue exploring the hidden mysteries behind America's cold cases.